We're trying to get through to Dr. Bill Craig, but unfortunately at the moment having a little bit of a technical issue trying to do just that. So let's just take a look at what's been happening at some of these protests. I'm told he is there now. That's good to know. Dr. Craig, good morning to you.
Good morning.
I'm glad we made contact. We were struggling there for a few minutes. Thank you for coming on today. Just explain to us, if you would, what it is you're claiming. You want a debate, I believe, don't you, with Richard Dawkins, high-profile atheist. But what is your perspective on God and his existence?
Well, I believe as a Christian philosopher and theologian that there are good reasons to believe that God exists, and that if someone will look at the evidence and the arguments with an open mind and an open heart, he can see that it's more probable than not that there is a creator and designer of the universe.
Now, when you say that the God exists, are you talking about belief? Because a lot of people believe that, or are you saying it is a fact?
I'm saying that it's a fact. Whether you go further and place your faith in this person and trust yourself to him, commit yourself to him, that's the real question of faith. But the question as to whether or not there is such a being, that's a factual question.
Now, Richard Dawkins, of course, famously is the person that says all this is nonsense. You really do want to debate with him, do you?
Well, it's not so much myself, actually. I'm being hosted by a number of Christian groups here in Britain, and it's they and the British Humanist Association that approached Professor Dawkins with invitations to participate in a debate of this sort, and to this date he's steadfastly refused.
If we don't accept that God is fact, what is the consequence of that?
I believe that if God does not exist, then ultimately there are no objective moral values and duties in the world, that everything becomes relative. And that would mean that you couldn't condemn, for example, crime and child abuse and discrimination and intolerance as evil, nor could you praise love and self-sacrifice and generosity as good, because everything would simply be the result of socio-biological pressures upon human society, and there wouldn't be any objective transcendent ground for moral values and duties. So I think this is a deeply important existential question.
And again, just so we understand the point you're making clearly, are you saying you can't have moral values unless you accept that God is fact, or without a belief in God?
I appreciate you asking that question, and I'm not arguing that without belief in God there would not be objective morality. That's a constant confusion. Rather, what I'm saying is that without God's existence as an objective fact, unless there is a transcendent good that actually exists, then moral values are simply socioculturally relative mores that different human groups have developed. So it's the fact of God's existence that is important, not belief in his existence.
But what's wrong with having moral values out of belief?
They become subjective. The Nazi, the Afrikaner, a defender of apartheid, even the rapist who chooses to flout the herd morality, then does nothing wrong. His view would be just as subjective as yours, and therefore there would be no ground for affirming objective good or evil in the world.
So you're comparing, are you, the people that might be listening to this, hopefully are listening to this morning, who are preparing to go to worship based on their belief in God, you're comparing their moral values to those of a Nazi?
I don't see that. What I said was that if God does not exist, then objective moral values and duties do not exist. But if there is a God, as I think, then both those who go to worship and those who stay home in bed have an objective foundation for affirming the goodness of love and sacrifice and open-mindedness, and an objective basis for condemning intolerance and greed and hatred and so forth.
And what is the basis of you saying that God exists fact?
Well, I give a number of arguments for God's existence. Number one, I think God is the best explanation for why anything at all exists. Two, God is the best explanation for the origin of the universe at a point in the finite past. Three, God is the best explanation for the fine-tuning of the universe for intelligent life. Four, God is the best explanation for the historical facts surrounding the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth. And fifth, I think God can be immediately known and experienced. So that would provide a kind of cumulative case for belief in the God revealed by Jesus of Nazareth.
But exactly, and a lot of people would say, yes, that's what I believe, but it doesn't say that God is fact.
Of course not, and that's why I give arguments for those conclusions. I simply listed there, as it were, gave the title of the arguments.
Right.
But in the debates that I'll be participating in, for example, at the University of Birmingham, I'll be debating Professor Peter Millikan from Oxford on the question of does God exist? And there I'll give my arguments, lay out the evidence and the premises, and Professor Millikan will give the arguments for atheism, and we'll have a discussion of them, and then students can make up their own minds.
Well, the chief executive of the British Humanist Association, you referred to them earlier, Andrew Copson, is taking part in an event where you'll be speaking, but
Yes.
he says he won't debate with you. This is what he had to say.
Whereas, for example, people like Anthony Grayling will happily sit down for a public conversation with the Archbishop of Canterbury, or people like Richard Dawkins will happily sit down on platforms for discussions with the Bishop of Oxford or whatever. They don't really want to engage with this particular person. A lot of people, and you can see the reports of debates online, a lot of people find him slippery and contorted. His arguments are often very obscure, and although they're baseless, they require so much refuting that it's difficult to do so in a debate format. And the general format that he prefers, those one-on-one occasions, often feel like setups, really, with largely Christian audiences who've mainly come to see him, and the format is sort of micromanaged, really, to his advantage.
Bill Craig, the chief executive of the British Humanist Association, says you're slippery and the whole event is micromanaged.
I think this is extraordinarily disingenuous. In fact, we're not debating in front of Christian audiences. When I go to Cambridge University, Copson and I will be debating there for the Cambridge Debating Society on this question. And I'm ready to do any sort of format, a formal debate format, a panel discussion, a dialogue, even just a moderated conversation. The point is, I have nothing to fear from those on the other side in terms of the arguments and the evidence that I present. I don't want to get up and simply give a lecture unopposed. I want to give the other side a chance to be heard as well, and then let students make up their mind. And I think this is the fair and even-handed way to handle important discussions of this sort.
Dr. William Craig, very grateful for your time this morning. Thank you for joining us on the programme. Dr. William Craig, American theologian, joining us, raising some interesting questions.